I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook. We're on Chapter 47 of The Stand, shall we? When it happened fast. It was around 9:45 on July 30th, and they had been on the road only an hour. Going was slow because there had been heavy showers the night before, and the road was still slippery. There had been little talk among the four of them since yesterday morning, when Stu had awakened, first Franny, then Harold and Glenn, to tell them about Pyrian's suicide. He was blaming himself, Fran thought miserably. Blaming himself for something that was no more his fault than a thunderstorm would have been. She would have liked to have told him so, partly because he needed to be scolded for his self-indulgence, and partly because she loved him. This latter was a fact she could no longer conceal from herself. She thought she could convince him that Perry's death wasn't his fault, but the convincing would entail showing him what her own true feelings were. She thought she would have to pin her heart to her sleeve, where he could see it. Unfortunately, Harold would be able to see it too. So that was out. But only for the time being. She thought that she would have to do it soon, Harold or no Harold. She could only protect him so long. Then he would have to know, and either accept or not accept. She was afraid Harold might opt for the second choice. A decision like that could lead to something horrible. They were, after all, carrying a lot of shooting irons. She was mulling these thoughts over when they swept around a curve and saw a large horse trailer overturned in the middle of the road, blocking it from one end to the other, its pink corrugated side still glistening with last night's rain. This was surprising enough, but there was more. 3 cars, all station wagons, and a big auto wrecker were parked along the sides of the road. There were people standing around too, at least a dozen of them. Fran was so surprised she braked too suddenly. The Honda she was riding skidded on the wet road and almost dumped her before she was able to get it under control. Then all 4 of them had stopped, more or less in a line, which crossed the road. Blinking and more than a little stunned at the sight of so many people who were still alive. "Okay, dismount," one of the men said. He was tall, sandy-bearded, and wearing dark sunglasses. Fran time traveled for a moment inside her head, back to the main turnpike and being hauled down by a state trooper for speeding. Next, he'll ask to see our driver's licenses, Fran thought. But that was no lone state trooper. This was no lone state trooper, bagging speeders and writing tickets. There were 4 men here, 3 of them standing behind a sandy-bearded man in a short skirmish line. The rest were all women, at least 8 of them. They looked pale and scared, clustered around the parked station wagons in little groups. The sandy-bearded man was carrying a pistol. The men behind him all had rifles. 2 of them were wearing bits and pieces of army kit. "Dismount, goddamn you," the bearded man said, and one of the men behind him levered around into the breech of his rifle. It was loud, bitterly imperative. It was a loud, bitterly imperative sound in the misty morning air. Glenn and Harold looked puzzled and apprehensive. That and no more. They're sitting ducks, Franny thought with raising panic. She did not fully understand the situation herself yet, but she knew the equation here was all wrong. 4 men, 8 women, her brain said, and then repeated it louder in tones of alarm. 4 men, 8 women. "Harold," Stu said in a quiet voice. Something had come up in his eyes, some realization. "Harold, don't." And then everything happened. Stu's rifle was slung over his back. He dropped one shoulder so that the strap slid down his arm, and then the rifle was in his hands. "Don't do it," the bearded man shouted furiously. "Garvey, Verge, Ronnie, get them. Save the woman." Harold began to grab for his pistols, at first forgetting they were still strapped into their holsters. Glenn Bateman still sat behind Harold in stunned surprise. Harold, Stu yelled again. Franny began to unsling her own rifle. She felt as if the air around her had suddenly been packed with invisible molasses. Treasley stuff she would never be able to struggle through in time. She realized they were probably going to die here. One of the girls screamed, "Now!" Franny's gaze switched to this girl even as she continued to struggle with her rifle. Not only a girl, not really a girl, she was at least 25, her hair, ash blonde, lay against her head in a ragged helmet, as if she had recently lopped it off with a pair of hedge clippers. Not all of the women moved. Some of them appeared to be nearly catatonic with fright, but the blonde girl and 3 of the others did. All of this happened in the space of 7 seconds. The bearded man had been pointing his pistol at Stu, and when the young blonde woman screamed now, the barrel jerked slightly toward her, like a divining rod sensing water. It went off, making a loud noise like a piece of steel being punched through cardboard. Stu fell off his bike and Franny screamed his name. Then Stu was up on both elbows. Both were scraped from hitting the road, and the Honda was lying on one of his legs, firing. The bearded man seemed to dance backward like a vaudeville hoofer, leaving the stage after his encore. The faded plaid skirt he was wearing puffed and billowed. Shirt he was wearing puffed and billowed. His pistol and automatic jerked up toward the sky, and that steel punching through cardboard sound happened 4 more times. He fell over on his back. 2 of the 3 men behind him had jerked around at the blonde woman's cry. One pulled both triggers of the weapon he was holding, an old-fashioned Remington 12-gauge. The stock of the gun was not resting against anything. He was holding it outside his right hip. And when it went off with a sound like a thunderclap in the small room, it flew backward out of his hands, ripping skin from his fingers as it went. It clattered on the road. The face of one of the women who had not reacted up to the blonde woman's shout dissolved in an unbelievable fury of blood. And for a moment, Franny could actually hear blood raining down on the pavement. As if there had been a sudden shower. One eye peered unharmed through the mask of blood this woman now wore. It was dazed and unknowing. Then the woman fell forward onto the road. The country squire station wagon behind her was peppered with buckshot. One of the windows was a cataract of milky cracks. The blonde girl grappled with the second man who had turned toward her. The rifle the man held went off between their bodies. One of the girls scrambled for the last shotgun. The third man, who had not turned toward the women, began to fire at Fran. Franny sat astride her bike, her rifle in her hands, blinking stupidly at him. He was an olive-skinned man who looked Italian. She felt a bullet drone by her left temple. Harold had finally gotten one of the pistols free. He raised it and fired it at the olive-skinned man. The distance was about 15 paces. He missed. A bullet hole appeared in the skin of the pink house trailer just to the left of the olive-skinned man's head. The olive-skinned man looked at Harold and said, "Now I'm going to kill you, you son of a bitch." "Don't do that," Harold screamed. He dropped his pistol and held out his open hands. The olive-skinned man fired 3 times at Harold. All 3 shots missed. The third round came the closest to doing damage. It screamed off the exhaust pipe of Harold's Yamaha. It fell over, spilling Harold and Glenn off. Now 20 seconds had passed. Harold and Stu lay flat, Glenn cross-legged on the road, still looking as if he didn't know exactly where he was or what was going on. Franny was trying desperately to shoot the olive-skinned man before he could shoot Harold or Stu, but her gun wouldn't fire. The trigger wouldn't even pull. because she had forgotten to thumb the safety catch to its off position. The blonde woman continued to struggle with the second man, and the woman who had gone after the dropped shotgun was now fighting with the second woman for possession of it. Cursing in a language which was undoubtedly Italian, the olive-skinned man aimed at Harold again, and then Stu fired, and the olive-skinned man's forehead caved in, and he went down like a sack of potatoes. Another woman had now joined the fray over the shotgun. The man who had lost it tried to throw her aside. She reached between his legs, grabbed his crotch of his jeans, and squeezed. Fran saw her hamstrings pop out all the way up her forearm to the elbow. The man screamed. The man lost interest in the shotgun. The man grabbed his privates and stumbled away, bent over. Harold crawled to where his dropped pistol lay on the road and pounced on it. He raised it and fired it at the man holding his privates. He fired 3 times and missed every time. It's like Bonnie and Clyde, Franny thought. Jesus, there's blood everywhere. The blonde woman with the ragged hair had lost her struggle for the possession of the second man's rifle. He jerked it free and kicked her, perhaps aiming for her stomach, catching her in the thigh with one of his heavy boots instead. She went quick stepping backward, whirling her arms for balance, and landed on her fanny with a wet splat. Now he'll shoot her, Franny thought. But the second man whirled around like a drunken sailor, doing a about face, and began to fire rapidly into the group of 3 women still cringing against the side of the country squire. "Yeah, you bitches," the gentleman screamed. "Yeah, you bitches." One of the women fell over and began to flop on the pavement between the station wagon and the overturned trailer like a stabbed fish. The other 2 women ran. Stu fired at the shooter and missed. The second man fired at one of the running women and did not. She threw her hands up to the sky and fell down. The other button-hooked left and ran behind the pink trailer. The third man, the one who had lost and failed to regain the shotgun, was still staggering around, holding his crotch. One of the women pointed the shotgun at him and pulled both triggers. Her eyes squeezed shut and her mouth grimaced in anticipation of the thunder. The thunder didn't come. The shotgun was dry. She reversed it so she was holding it by the barrels and brought the stock down in a hard arc. She missed his head, but got the place where his neck joined his right shoulder. The man was driven to his knees. She began to crawl away. The woman, who was wearing a blue sweatshirt, which said Kent State University, and tattered blue jeans, walked along after him, bludgeoning him with the shotgun as she went. I don't know why I'm so dry. The man continued to crawl, blood now running off him in rivers. The woman in the Kent State sweatshirt continued to wail on him. "Yeah, you bitches," the second man screamed and fired at the dazed and muttered middle-aged woman. The distance between the muzzle and the woman was at most 3 feet. She could almost have reached out and plugged the barrel with her pinky finger. He missed. He pulled the trigger again, but this time the rifle only dry-fired. Harold was now holding the pistol in both hands, as he had seen cops do in the movies. He pulled the trigger, and his bullet smashed the second man's elbow. The second man dropped his rifle and began to dance up and down, making high jabbering noises. To Franny, he sounded a little like Roger Rabbit saying, "Please!" "I got him," Harold cried ecstatically. "Got him, by God, I got him." Franny finally remembered the safety catch on her rifle. She thumbed it off just as Stu fired again. The second man fell down, now clutching his stomach instead of his elbow. He went on screaming. My God," Glenn said mildly. He put his face into his hands and began to weep. He fired his pistol again. The second man's body jumped. He stopped screaming. The woman in the Kent State sweatshirt brought the stock of the shotgun down again, and this time she connected solidly with the crawling man's head. It sounded like Jim Rice connecting solidly with a high, hard fastball. The shotgun's walnut stalk and the man's head both shattered. For a moment there was silence. A bird called in it. Weet, 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 weet. Then the girl in the sweatshirt stood astride and gave a long, primeval cry of triumph that haunted Franny Goldsmith for the rest of her life. The blonde girl was Dana Jurgens from Xenia, Ohio. The girl in the Kent State sweatshirt was Sue Stern. The third woman, the one who had squeezed Shotgun's crotch, was Patty Kroger. The other two were quite a bit older. The eldest, Dana said, was Shirley Hammett. They didn't know the name of the other woman, who looked to be in her mid-30s. She had been in shock, wondering when Al, Garvey, Verg, and Ronnie had picked her up in the town of Archbold 2 days before. The 9 of them got off the highway and camped in the farmhouse somewhere just west of Columbia. Now over the Indiana state line, they were all in shock, and Fran thought, in later days, that their walk across the field from the overturned pink trailer to the turnpike to the farmhouse would have looked to an observer like a field trip sponsored by the local lunatic asylum. The grass, thigh-high and still wet from the previous night's rain, had soon soaked their pants. White butterflies, sluggish in the air because their wings were still heavy with moisture, swooped toward them and then away in drugged circles and figure eights. The sun was struggling to break through, but hadn't made it yet. It was a bright smear, feebly illuminating a uniform white cloud cover that stretched from horizon to horizon. But cloud cover or no cloud cover, the day was hot already, ringing with humidity, and the air was filled with whirling flocks of crows and their raucous, ugly cries. There were more crows than people now, Franny thought dazedly. If we don't watch out, they'll peck us right off the face of the earth. Revenge of the blackbirds. Were crows man-eaters? She very much feared that they were. Below this steady trickle of nonsense, barely visible, like the sun behind the melting cloud cover, but full of power as the sun was on this awful humid morning, the 13th of July, 1990. The gun battle played over and over in her mind. The woman's face, disintegrating under the shotgun blast, Stu falling over, the instant of stark terror when she had been sure he was dead, the man crying out, "Yo, yeah, you bitches," and then sounding like Roger Rabbit when Harold plugged him. The steel punching through cardboard sound of the bearded man's pistol, Susan Stern's primitive cry of victory as she stood astride the body of her enemy while his brain, still warm, leaked out of his cloven skull. Glenn walked beside her, his thin, rather sardonic face now distraught, his gray hair flying wispily around his head as if in imitation of the butterflies. He held her hand, and he kept patting it compulsively. "You mustn't let it affect you," he said. "Such horrors bound to occur. But best protection is in numbers. Society, you know. Society is the keystone of the arch we call civilization, and it is the only real antidote to outlawry. You must take things like this, as a matter of course. This is an isolated occurrence. Think of them as trolls. Yes, trolls or yogs or a fritz. Monsters of a generic sort. I accept that. I hold that truth to be self-evident. A socio-constitutional ethic, one might say. Ha ha ha. His laugh was half-moon. She punctuated each of his elliptical sentences with "Yes, Glenn." But he seemed not to hear. Glenn smelled a trifle vomitous. The butterflies banged against them and then banged off again on their butterfly errands. They were almost to the farmhouse. The battle had lasted less than a minute. Less than a minute. She suspected it was going to be held over by popular demand inside her head. Glenn patted her hand. She wanted to tell him to please stop doing that, but she was afraid that he might cry if she did. She could stand the patting. She wasn't sure she could stand to see Glenn Bateman weeping. Stu was walking with Harold on one side and the blonde girl, Dana Jurgens, on the other. Susan Stern and Patty Kroger flanked the unmanned catatonic woman who had been picked up in Archbold. Shirley Hammett, the woman who had been missed at point blank range by the man who had imitated Roger Rabbit before he died, walked a little way off to the left, muttering and making the occasional grab at the passing butterflies. The party was walking slowly, but Shirley Hammett was slower. Her gray hair hung untidily about her face, and her dazed eyes peered out at the world like frightened mice peering out of a temporary bolt hole. Harold looked at Stu uneasily. We wiped them out, didn't we, Stu? We blew them away? Scragged their asses? I guess so, Harold. Man, but we had to, Harold said earnestly, as if Stu had suggested things might have been otherwise. It was them or us. They would have blown your heads off, Dana Jurgens said quietly. I was with two guys when they hit us. They shot Rich and Damon from ambush. After it was over, they put a round in each of their heads just to make sure. You had to, all right. By rights, you should be dead now. By rights, we should be dead now? Harold exclaimed to Stu. It's all right, Stu said. Take her easy, Harold. Sure, negative perspiration, Harold said heartily. He fumbled jerkily in his pack, got a chocolate payday, and almost dropped it while stripping off the wrapper. He cursed it bitterly and then began to gobble it, holding it in both hands like a lollipop. They had reached the farmhouse. Harold had to keep touching himself furtively as he ate his candy bar, had to keep making sure he wasn't hurt. He felt very sick. He was afraid to look down at his crotch. He was pretty sure he had wet himself shortly after the festivities back at the pink trailer got into high gear. Dana and Susan did most of the talking over the distraught brunch, which some picked at, but not really ate. Patty Kroger, who was 17 and absolutely beautiful, occasionally added something. The woman with no name scrunched herself into the farthest corner of the dusty farmhouse kitchen. Shirley Hammett sat at a table, ate stale Nabisco honeygrams, and muttered. Dana had left Zinnia in the company of Richard Darless and Damon Brecknell. How many others had been alive in Zinnia after the flu? Only 3 that she had seen. A very old man, a woman, and a little girl. Dana and her friends asked the trio to join them, but the old man waved them off, saying something about having business in the desert. By the 8th of July, Dana, Richard, and Damon had begun to suffer bad dreams about sort of boogeyman, very scary dreams. Richard had actually gotten the idea that the boogeyman was real, Dana said, and living in California. He had an idea that this man, if he really was a man, was the business the other 3 peoples they'd met had in the desert. She and Damon had begun to fear for Richard's sanity. He called the dream man the hard case and said he was getting an army of hard cases together. He said this army would soon sweep out of the West and enslave everyone left alive, first in America, then the rest of the world. Dana and Damon had begun to privately discuss the possibility of slipping away from Rich some night, and had begun to believe that their own dreams were the result of Rich Darless's powerful delusion. In Williamston, they had come around a corner in the highway to discover a large dump truck lying on its side in the middle of the road. There was a station wagon and a wrecker parked nearby. We assumed it was just another smash-up, Dana said, crumbling a graham cracker nervously between her fingers, which was, of course, exactly what we were supposed to think. They got off their cycles in order to trundle them around the dump truck, and that was when the 4 hard cases, to use Rich's word, opened up from the ditch. They had murdered Rich and Damon and had taken Dinah prisoner. She was a fourth addition to what they sometimes called the zoo, or sometimes the harem. One of the others had been the muttering Shirley Hammett, who at the time had still been almost normal, although she had been repeatedly raped, sodomized, and forced to perform fellatio on all four. And once, Dana said, when she couldn't hold on until it was time for one of them to take her into the bushes, Ronnie wiped her ass with a handful of barbed wire. She bled from her rectum for 3 days. Jesus Christ, you said. Which one was he? The man with the shotgun, Susan Stearns said. The one I brained. I wish he was right here, lying on the floor, so I could do it again. The man with the sandy beard and sunglasses they had known only as Doc. He and Verge had been part of an army detachment which had been sent to Akron when the flu broke out. Their jobs had been media relations, which was an army euphemism for media suppression. When that job was pretty well in hand, they had gone on to crowd control, which was an army euphemism for shooting looters who ran and hanging looters who didn't. By the 27th of June, Doc had told them the chain of command had a lot more holes than it did links. A good many of their own men were too ill to patrol, but by then it didn't matter anyway. All the citizens of Akron were too weak to read or write the news, let alone loot banks and jewelry stores. By June 30th, the unit was gone, its members dead, dying, or scattered. Doc and Verge were the only two scatteries, as a matter of fact, and that was when they had begun their new lives as zookeepers. Garvey had come along on the 1st of July and Ronnie on the 3rd. At that point, they had closed the peculiar little club to further memberships. After a while, you must have outnumbered them, Glenn said. Unexpectedly, it was Shirley Hammett who had spoke to this. Pills, she said, her trapped mice eyes staring out at them from behind the fringe of her graying bangs. Pills every morning to get up, pills every night to go down, ups and downs. Her voice had been sinking, and this last was barely audible. She paused and then began to mutter again. Susan Stern took up the thread of the story. She and one of the dead women, Rachel Carmody, had been picked up on July 17th, outside Columbus. By then, the party was traveling in a caravan, which consisted of 2 station wagons and the wrecker. The men used the wrecker to move crashed vehicles out of their way or to roadblock the highway, depending on what opportunities afforded. Doc kept the pharmacy tied to his belt and an outsized Coke, heavy downers for bedtime, tranks for travel, breads for recess. I'd get up in the morning, be raped 2 or 3 times, and then wait for Doc to hand out the pills, Susan said matter-of-factly. The daytime pills, I mean. By the 3rd day, I had abrasions on my vagina, and any sort of normal intercourse was very painful. I used to hope for Ronnie, because all Ronnie wanted was a blowjob. But after the pills, he got very calm. Not sleepy, just calm. Things didn't seem to matter after you got yourself wrapped around a few of those blue pills. All you wanted to do was sit with your hands in your lap and watch the scenery go by, or sit with your hands in your lap and watch them use the wrecker to move something out of the way. One day, Garvey got mad because this one girl, she couldn't have been any more than 12. She wouldn't do, well, I'm not going to tell you, it was that bad. So Garvey blew her head off. I didn't even care. I was just calm. After a while, you almost stopped thinking about escape. What you wanted more than getting away was the blue pills. Dana and Patty Kroger were nodding. But they seemed to recognize 8 women as their effective number, Patty said. When they took her on July 22nd, after murdering the 50-ish man, 50th, 50th, the 50-ish man she had been traveling with, they had killed a very old woman who had been a part of the zoo for about a week. When the unnamed girl sitting in the corner had been picked up near Archbold, a 16-year-old girl with strabismus had been shot and left in a ditch. Doc used to joke about it, Patty said. He'd say, I don't walk under ladders, I don't cross black cats' paths, and I'm not going to have 13 people traveling with me. On the 29th, they had caught sight of Stu and the others for the first time. The zoo had been camped in a picnic area just off the interstate when the four of them passed by. Garvey was very taken with you, Susan said, nodding toward Franny. Franny shuddered. Dana leaned closer to them and spoke softly, and they'd made it pretty clear whose place you were going to take. She nodded her head almost impeccably at Shirley Hammett, who was still muttering and eating graham crackers. Poor woman, Franny said. It was Dana who decided you guys might be our best chance, Patty said. Or maybe our last chance. There were 3 men in your party. Both she and Heather Rodgett had seen that. 3 armed men. And Doc had gotten just the teeniest bit overconfident about the trailer overturned in the road bit. Doc would just act like somebody official, and the men in the parties they met when there were men just caved in and got shot. It had been working like a charm. Dana asked us to try and palm our pills this morning. Susan went on. They'd gotten sort of careless about making sure we really took them too. And we knew that this morning they'd be busy pulling that big trailer out into the road and tipping it over. We didn't tell everyone. The only ones in on it were Dana and Patty and Helen Roget. One of the girls, Ronnie, shot back there, and me, of course. Helen said if they catch us trying to spit the pills into our hands, they're going to kill us. And Dana said they would kill us anyway, sooner or later, and only sooner. We were lucky, of course. We knew that was true, so we did it. I had to hold mine in my mouth for quite a while, Patty said. It was starting to dissolve by the time I got a chance to spit it out. She looked at Dana. I think Helen actually had to swallow hers. I think that's why she was so slow. Dana nodded. She was looking at Stu with a clear warmth that made Franny uneasy. It still would have worked if you hadn't gotten wise, big fella. I didn't get wise near soon enough, looks like, Stu said. Next time I will. He stood up, went to the window, and looked out. You know, that's half of what scares me, he said. How wise we're all getting. Fran cared even less for the sympathetic way Dana looked at him. She had no right to look sympathetic after all she'd been through, and she's much prettier than I am. In spite of everything, Fran thought. Also, I doubt if she's pregnant. It's a get wise world, big fella, Dana said. Get wise or die. Stu turned to look at her, really seeing her for the first time, and Fran felt a stab of pure jealous agony. I waited too long, she thought. Oh my God, I went and did it. I went and waited too long. She happened to glance at Harold and saw Harold was smiling in a guarded way, one hand up to his mouth to conceal it. It looked like a smile of relief. She suddenly felt that she would like to stand up, walk casually over to Harold, and hook his eyes out of his head with her fingernails. Never, Harold, she would scream as she did it. Never. Never? From Fran Goldsmith's diary, July 19th, 1990. Oh, Lord, the worst has happened. At least in the books, when it happened, it's over. Something to at least changes. But in real life, it just seems to go on, like a soap opera where nothing ever comes to a head. Maybe I should move to clear things up, take a chance, but I'm so afraid something might happen between them, and you can't end a sentence with and I'm afraid to put down what might come after the conjunction. Let me tell you everything, dear diary. Even though it's no great treat to write it down, I even hate to think about it. Glenn and Stu went into town, which happens to be Girard, Ohio, tonight, near dusk, to look for some food, hopefully concentrates and freeze-dried stuff. They're easy to carry, and some of the concentrates are really tasty. But as far as I'm concerned, all the freeze-dried food has the same flavor, namely dried turkey turds. And when have you ever had dried turkey turds to serve as your basis for a comparison? Never mind, diary. Some things will never be told. They asked Harold and me if we wanted to come, and I said I'd had enough motorcycling for one day, if they could do without me, and Harold said no. He would fetch some water and get it boiled up, probably already lying his plans. Sorry to make him sound so scheming, but the fact is he is. A note here. We are all fantastically sick of boiled water, which tastes flat and totally devoid of oxygen, but both Mark and Glenn say the factories, etc., have not been shut down nearly long enough for the streams and rivers to have purified themselves, especially in the industrial Northeast and what they call the Rust Belt. So we all boil to be safe. We all keep hoping we'll find a large supply of bottled mineral water sooner or later. It should have already, so Harold says. But a lot of it seems to have mysteriously disappeared. Stu thinks that a lot of people must have decided it was the tap water that was making them sick, and used up a lot of mineral water before they died. Well, Mark and Perian were off somewhere, supposedly hunting for wild berries to supplement our diet, probably doing something else. They were quite modest about it, and bully for them. And so I was first gathering wood for the fire, and then getting one going for Harold's kettle of water. And pretty soon he came back with one. He'd pretty obviously stayed at the stream long enough to have a bath and wash his hair. He hung it on the, that goes over the fire. Then he comes and sits down beside me. We were sitting on a log, talking about one thing and another, when he suddenly put his arms around me and tried to kiss me. I say tried, but he actually succeeded, at least at first, because I was so surprised. Then I jerked away from him. Looking back, it seems sort of comic, although I'm still sore. And I fell backward right off the log. It rucked up the back of my blouse and scratched about a yard of skin off. I let out a yell. Talk about history repeating. That was too much like the time with Jess out on the breakwater when I bit my tongue. Too much like it for comfort. In a second, Harold's on one knee beside me, asking if I'm all right, brushing right down to the roots of his clean hair. Blushing right down to the roots of his clean hair. Harold tries something to be so icy, so sophisticated. He always seems to be, to me, like a jaded young writer constantly searching for that special sad cafe on the West Bank where he can idle the day away talking about Jean-Paul Sartre or drinking cheap funk. But underneath, well covered, is a teenager with a far less mature set of fantasies, or so I believe. Saturday matinee fantasies for the most part. Tyrone Power in Captain from Castile, Humphrey Bogart in Dark Passage, Steve McQueen in Bullet. In times of stress, it's always, hi! We are in chapter 47. We're just a little bit in. I'm actually in my book, which is this book here. I'm actually on page 563. So hopefully that'll help. Yeah. So it's nice to meet you. Sometimes I miss the chat. In times of stress, it's always this side of him which seems to come out, maybe because he repressed it so severely as a child. I don't know. Anyway, when he regresses to Bogey, he only succeeds in reminding me of that guy who played Bogey in the Woody Allen movie, Play It Again, Sam. So when he knelt beside me and said, "Are you all right, baby?" I started to giggle. Talk about history repeating itself. But it was more than the humor of the situation, you know. If that had been all, I could have held it in. No, it was more in the lines of hysterics. The bad dreams, the worrying about the baby, what to do about my feelings for Stu, the traveling every day, the stiffness, the soreness. Losing my parents, everything changed for good. It came out in giggles at first, and then in hysterical laughter. I just couldn't stop.
I just signed that by accidentally.
Well, I don't know what the password is. Give it to me.
By accident. @gmail.com.
Hey! We are not going to talk about what this is right now, because I am... Let me see if I can remember.
You can...
Let me see if I can remember. No, that's not it. Nope, I can't remember it. Damn. You know what? He probably changed it, so you're gonna have to holler up and ask him what the password is.
Or maybe text him?
Go. Okay, fine. Text him and ask him. Go sit down and text him and ask him. Okay? Hysterical laughter, and I just couldn't stop. "What's so funny?" Harold asked, getting up. I think it was supposed to come out in this terribly righteous voice. But by then, I had stopped thinking about Harold and got this crazy image of Donald Duck in my head. Donald Duck waddling through the ruins of Western civilization, quacking angrily, "What's so funny, huh? What's so funny? What's so fucking funny?" I put my hands over my face and just giggled and sobbed and giggled until Harold must have thought I'd gone absolutely crackers. After a little bit, I managed to stop. I wiped the tears off my face and wanted to ask Harold to look at my back to see how badly it was scraped. But I didn't, because I was afraid he might take it as a liberty. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of Franny. Oh ho, that's not funny. "Fran," Harold says, "I find this very hard to say." "Then maybe you better not say it," I said. "I have to," he answers. And I began to see he wasn't going to take no for an answer unless it was hollered at him. "Franny," he says, "I love you." I guess I knew all along it was just as bald as that. It would be easier if he only wanted to sleep with me. Love's more dangerous than just bawling. And I was in a spot. How to say no to Harold? I guess there's only one way, no matter who you have to say it to. "I don't love you, Harold," is what I said. His face cracked all to pieces. "It's him, isn't it?" he said. And his face got an ugly grimace on it. "It's Stu Redmond, isn't it?" "I don't know," I said. Now I have a temper, which I have not always been able to control. A gift from my mother's side, I think. But I have struggled womanfully with it as applies to Harold. I could feel it straining its leash. However, I know his voice had gotten shrill and self-pitying. I know, all right. The day we met him, I knew it then. I didn't want him to come with us because I knew, and he said, what did he say? That he didn't want you, that you could be mine? Just like giving you a nice pair of shoes, right, Harold? He didn't answer, maybe realizing he had gone too far. With a little of effort, I remembered back to that day in Fabian. Harold's instant reaction to Stu was the reaction of a dog when a new dog, a strange dog, comes into the first dog's yard, into his domain. I could almost see the hackles
Hey, historical
bristling.
one.
Okay, bristling on the back of Harold's neck. I understood then what Stu said. He said it to take us out of the class of dogs and put us back in the class of people. And it isn't that what, and isn't that, and isn't that what it's really all about? This hellacious struggle we're in now, I mean. If it isn't, why are we even bothering to try and be decent? No one owns me, Harold, I said. He muttered something. What? I said, you may have to change that idea. A sharp retort came to mind, but I didn't let it out. Harold's eyes had gone far away, and his face was still, very still and open. He said, I've seen that guy before. You better believe it, Franny. He's the guy that's the quarterback of the football team, but who just sits there in class throwing spitballs and flipping people the bird because he knows the teacher's got to pass him with at least a C so he can keep on playing. He's the guy who goes steady with the prettiest cheerleader and he thinks he's Jesus Christ with a bullet. The guy who farts when the English teacher asks you to read your composition because it's the best one in the class. Yeah, I know fuckers like him. Good luck, Fran. Then he just walked off. It wasn't the grand, trampling exit that he'd meant it to make, I feel quite sure. It was more like he'd had some secret dream and I'd just shot it full of holes. The dream being that things had changed and the reality being that nothing really had. I felt terrible for him, God's truth, because when he walked off, he wasn't playing at jaded cynicism, but feeling real cynicism. Not jaded but as sharp and hurtful as a knife blade. He was whipped. Oh, but what Harold will never see is that his head has got to change a little first. He's got to see that the world is going to stay the same as long as he does. He stores up rebuffs the way pirates are supposed to store up treasure. Well, now everyone is back, supper eaten, smoke smoked, Vernal handed out. Mine is in my pocket instead of dissolving in my stomach. People settled down. Harold and I have gone through painful confrontation, which has left me with a feeling of nothing has really been resolved, except that he is watching Stu and me to see what happens next. It makes me feel sick and pointlessly angry to write that. What right does he have to watch us? What right does he have to complicate this miserable situation we're in? Things to remember. I'm sorry, diary. It must be my state of mind. I can't remember a single thing. When Franny came upon him, Stu was sitting on a rock and smoking a cigar. He had scraped a small round circle of bare earth with his boot heel and was using it for an ashtray. He was facing west, where the sun was just going down. The clouds had rifted enough to allow the red sun to poke its head through. Although they had met the four women and taken them into their party only yesterday, it already seemed distant. They had gotten one of the station wagons out of the ditch easily enough, and now, with the motorcycles, they had quite a caravan as they moved slowly west on the turnpike. The smell of his cigar made her think of her father and her father's pipe. What came with the memory was sorrow that had almost mellowed into nostalgia. I'm getting over losing you, Daddy, she thought. I don't think you'd mind. Stu looked around. Franny, he said with real pleasure. How are you? She shrugged up and around. Want to share my rock and watch the sun go down? He joined him, her heartbeat quickening a little. But after all, why else had she come out here? She had known which way he had left camp, just as she knew that Harold and Glenn and the two girls had gone into Brighton to look for the CB radio. Glenn's idea instead of Harold's for a change. Patty Kroger was back in camp babysitting their two combat-fatigued patients. Shirley Hammett showed some signs of coming out of her daze, but she had awakened them all around one this morning, shrieking in her sleep, her hands clawing at the air and warding off gestures. The other woman, the one with no name, seemed to be going in the other direction. She sat, She would eat if she was fed. She would perform the functions of elimination. She would not answer questions. She only really came alive in her sleep. Even with a heavy dose of Veneral, she often moaned and sometimes shrieked. Franny thought she knew what the poor woman was dreaming of. Seemed like a long way still to go, doesn't it? She said. He didn't answer for a moment, and then he said, It's further than we thought. The old woman, she's not in Nebraska anymore. I know, he began, and then bit down on her words. He glanced at her with a faint grin. You've been skipping your medication, ma'am. My secret's out, she said, with a lame smile. We're not the only ones, Stu said. I was talking to Dana this afternoon. She felt that interior dig of jealousy and fear at the familiar way he used her name. And she said neither she nor Susan wanted to take it. Franny nodded. Why did you stop? Did they drug you in that place? He tapped ashes into his bare earth ashtray, mild sedatives at night, that was all. They didn't need to drug me. I was locked up nice and tight. No, I stopped 3 nights ago because I felt out of touch. He meditated for a moment and then it expanded. Glenn and Harold going to get the CB radio. That was the real good idea. What's the two-way for? Put you in touch. This buddy of mine back in Arnett, Tony Leomeister, he had one in his scout. Great gadget. You can talk to folks or you could holler for help if you got into a jam of trouble. These dreams, they're almost like having a CB in your head, except the transmit seems to be broken and we're only receiving. Maybe we are transmitting, Franny said quietly. He looked at her startled. They sat quiet for a while. The sun peered through the clouds as if to say a quick goodbye before sinking below the horizon. Fran could understand why primitive people worshipped it, as the genuine quiet of the newly empty country accumulated on her day by day, imprinting its truth on her brain by its very weight. The sun, the moon too for that matter, began to seem bigger and more important, more personal. Hey, get out of there. Phoebe? No, you leave it. Phoebe? Phoebe! Hey! Phoebe! Stop! Thank you. Oy. More personal, those bright sky ships began to look to you as they had when you were a child. Anyway, I stopped, Stu said. Last night I dreamed about the black man again. It was the worst yet. He's sitting up somewhere out in the desert. Las Vegas, I think. And Franny, I think he's crucifying people. The ones who give him trouble. He's doing what? That's what I dreamed. Lines of crosses along Highway 15, made out of barn beams and telephone poles. People hanging off them. Just a dream, she said uneasily. Maybe. He smoked and looked west at the red-tinged clouds. But the other 2 nights, just before we ran on those maniacs holding the women, I dreamed about her, the woman who calls herself Mother Abigail. She was sitting in a cab of an old pickup truck parked on the shoulder of Highway 76. I was standing on the ground with one arm leaning on the window, talking to her just as natural as I'm talking to you. And she says, You gotta move him along faster there still, Stuart. If an old lady like me can do it, a big tough fellow from Texas like you should be able to. Stu laughed, threw down a cigar, and crushed it under his heel. In kind of an absent way, as if not knowing what he was doing, put his arm around Franny's shoulders. They're going to Colorado, she said. Why, yes, I think they are. Has either Dana or Susan dreamed of her? Both. And last night, Susan dreamed of the crosses, just like I did. There's a lot of people with that old woman now. Stu agreed. 20, maybe more. You know, we're passing people nearly every day. They just hunker down and wait for us to go by. They're scared of us, but her, they'll come to her, I guess, in their own good time. Or to the other one, Franny said. Stu nodded. Yeah, or to him. Fran, why did you stop taking the Veneral? She uttered a trembling sigh and wondered if she should tell him. She wanted to, but she was afraid of what his reaction might be. "There's no counting on what a woman will do," she said at last. "No," he agreed, "but there are ways to find out what they're thinking, maybe." "What?" she began, and he stopped her mouth with a kiss. They lay on the grass in the last of the twilight. Flagrant red had given way to cooler purple, as they made love, and now Franny could see stars shining through the last of the clouds. It would be good riding weather tomorrow, but with any luck, they would be able to get most of the way across Indiana. Stu slapped lazily at a mosquito hovering over his chest. His shirt was hung on a nearby bush. Fran's shirt was on, but unbuttoned. Her breast pushed at the cloth, and she thought, "I'm getting bigger. Just a little right now, but it's noticeable, at least to me. I've wanted you for a pretty long time now," Stu said without looking directly at her. "I guess you know that. I wanted to avoid trouble with Harold," she said, "and there's something else that Harold's got a ways to go," Stu said, "but he's got the makings of a fine man somewhere inside of him if he'll toughen up. You like him, don't you?" "No, that's not the right word. There isn't a word in English for how I feel about Harold." "How do you feel about me?" he asked. She looked at him and found she couldn't say she loved him. Couldn't say it right now, although she wanted to. "No," he said, as if she'd contradicted him. "I just like to get things straight. I guess you just as soon not have Harold know anything about this yet, isn't that right?" "Yes," she said gratefully. "It's just as well. If we lie low, it may take care of itself. I've seen him looking at Patty. She's about his age. I don't know. You feel a debt of gratitude to him, don't you?" "I suppose so. We were the only two left in Ongenquit, and that was luck, no more, Franny. You don't want to let anyone put you in a head hold over something that was pure luck, I suppose." "I guess I love you," he said. "That's not so easy for me to say." "I guess I love you too, but there's something else. I knew that. You asked me why I stopped taking the pills." She plucked at her shirt, not daring to look at him. Her lips felt unnaturally dry. "I thought they might be bad for the baby," she whispered. He stopped, and then grasped her and turned her to face him. "You're pregnant?" She nodded. "And you didn't tell anyone?" "No." "Harold, does he know?" "No. No one but you." "God almighty damn," he said. He was peering into her face in a concentrated way that scared her. She had imagined one of two things. He would leave her immediately, as Jess undoubtedly would have done if he had discovered she was pregnant with another man's child. Or he would hug her, tell her not to worry, and that we would take care of everything. She had never expected this startled, close scrutiny, and she found herself remembering the night she had told her father in the garden. His look had been very much like this one. She wished she had told Stu what her situation was before they had made love. Maybe then they wouldn't have made love at all, but at least he wouldn't have been able to feel he had somehow taken advantage of her. That she was, what was the old phrase, damaged goods? Was he thinking that? She simply could not tell. "Stu?" she said in a frightened voice. "You didn't tell anyone?" he repeated. "Didn't know how." Her tears were close to the surface now. "When are you due?" "January," she said, and the tears came. He held her and made her know it was all right without saying anything. He didn't tell her not to worry, or that he would take care of everything. That he made love to her again, and she thought that she had never been so happy. Neither of them saw Harold, as shadowy and as silent as a dark man himself, standing in the bushes and looking at them. Neither of them knew that his eyes squinted down into small, deadly triangles as Fran cried out with her pleasure at the end of it, as her good orgasm burst through her. By the time they had finished, it was full dark. Harold slipped away silently. Give me 1 second. I'm going to check something. I need to check something real quick. I don't know. Guess it wasn't important, whatever it was. From Fran Goldsmith's diary, August 1st, 1990. No entry last night. Too excited, too happy. Stu and I are together. He has agreed that I'd better keep the secret of my Lone Ranger as long as possible, hopefully until we are settled. If it's to be Colorado, that's okay with me. The way I feel tonight, the mountains of the moon would be okay with me. Do I sound like a dizzy schoolgirl? Well, if a lady can't sound like a dizzy schoolgirl in her diary, where can she sound like one? But I must say one other thing before I drop the subject of the Lone Ranger. Are you done pulling that out? It has to do with my maternal instinct. Is there such a thing? I think yes, probably hormonal. I have not felt my old self for some weeks now, but it is very hard to separate the changes caused by my pregnancy from the changes caused by the terrible disaster which has overtaken the world. But there is a certain jealous feeling. Jealousy isn't really the right word, but it's the closest I can seem to come to the right word tonight. The feeling that you have moved a little closer to the center of the universe and must protect your position there. That's why the Veneral seems a greater risk than the bad dreams. Although my rational mind believes the Veneral would not hurt the baby at all, not at least at the low levels the others have been maintaining. And I suppose the jealous feeling is also the part of the love I feel for Stu Redmond. I feel I am loving as well as eating for two. Otherwise, I must be quick. I need my sleep, no matter what dreams may come. We hadn't made it all the way across Indiana as quickly as we hoped. A horrible clog of vehicles near the Elkhart interchange slowed us down. A good many of the vehicles were Army. There were dead soldiers. Glenn, Susan Stern, Dana, and Stu took as much firepower as they could find. About 24 rifles, some grenades, and, yes, folks, it's true, a rocket launcher. As I write now, Harold and Stu are trying to figure out the rocket launcher, for which there are 17 or 18 rockets. Please God, they don't blow themselves up. Speaking of Harold, I must tell you, dear diary, that he doesn't suspect a thing. Sounds like a line from an old Betty Davis movie, doesn't it? When we catch up with Mother Abigail's party, I suppose he will have to be told. It would not be fair to hide it any longer, come what may. Hey, knock it off. But today he was brighter and more cheerful than I have ever seen him. He grinned so much I thought his face would crack. He was the one who suggested Stu help him with the dangerous rocket launcher, but here they come back now. We'll finish later. Franny slept heavily and dreamily. She did not. So did they all, with the exception of Harold Lauder. Sometime shortly after midnight, he rose and walked softly to where Franny lay, and stood looking down at her. He was not smiling now, although he had smiled all day. At times he had felt that the smile would crack his face right up the middle and spill out his whirling brains. Stop. That might have been a relief. He stood looking down at her, listening to the chire of summer crickets. We're in dog's days now, he thought. Dog days. From July the 25th. From July the 25th to August 28th, according to Webster's. So named because rabid dogs were supposed to be the most common then. He looked down at Fran, sleeping so sweetly under her sweater for a pillow. Using her sweater for a pillow. Her pack was beside her. Every dog has its day, Franny. He knelt, freezing at the gunshots of his bleeding knees, but no one stirred. He unbuckled her pack, untied the drawstring, and reached inside. He trained a small pencil flash in the pack's contents. Franny muttered from deep down in sleep, stirred, and Harold held his breath. He found what he wanted way at the bottom, behind 3 clean blouses and a a lap-eared pocket road atlas, a spiral notebook. He pulled it out, opened the first page, and shone his light on Franny's close, extremely legible handwriting. July 6, 1990, after some persuasion, Mr. Bateman has agreed to come along with us. Harold shut the book and crept back to his sleeping bag with it. He was feeling like a little boy he had once been, the boy with few friends. He had enjoyed a brief period of babyhood, beauty until about age 3, had been a fat, ugly joke ever since. But many enemies, the boy who had been more or less taken for granted by his parents. Their eyes had been trained on Amy as she began her long walk down the Miss America Atlantic City runway of her life. The boy who had turned to books for solace. The boy who had escaped never being picked for baseball and always being passed over for school patrol boy by becoming Long John Silver or Tarzan or Philip Kent. The boy who had become those people late at night under his covers with a flashlight trained on the printed page. His eyes wide with excitement, barely smelling his own bed farts. This boy now crawled upside down to the bottom of his sleeping bag with Franny's diary and his flashlight. As he trained its beams on the front cover of the spiral, there was a moment of sanity. For just a moment, part of his mind cried out, "Harold, stop!" so strongly that he was shaken to his heels. And stop he almost did. For just a moment it seemed possible to stop, to put the diary back where he had found it, to give her up, to let them go their own way before something terrible and irrevocable happened. For that moment it seemed he could put the bitter drink away, pour it out of the cup, and refill it with whatever there was for him in this world. "Get over it, Harold," the sane voice begged. But maybe it was already too late. At age 16, he had given up Burroughs and Stevenson and Robert Howard in favor of other fantasies that were both well-loved and much hated. Not of rockets or pirates, but of girls in silk see-through pajamas kneeling before him and on satin pillows, while Harold the Great lolled naked on his throne, ready to chastise them with small leather whips, with silver-headed canes. They were bitter fantasies through which each pretty girl in Algonquin High School had strolled at one time or another. These daydreams always ended with a gathering expletive in his loins, an explosion of seminal fluid that had more curse than pleasure. And then he would sleep, the sperm drying to a scale on his belly. Ugh. Every doggy has his day. And now it was those bitter fantasies, the old hurts, that he gathered around him like yellow sheets. The old friends who had never died, whose teeth never dulled, whose deadly affection never wavered. He turned to the first page, trained his flashlight on the words, and began to read. In the hour before dawn, he replaced the diary in Fran's pack and secured the buckles. He took no special precautions. If she woke, he thought coldly, he would kill her and then run. Run where, west? But he would not stop in Nebraska or even in Colorado. Oh, no. She didn't wake. He went back to his sleeping bag. He masturbated bitterly. When sleep came, it was thin. He dreamed he was dying halfway down a steep grade of tumbled rocks and moonscape boulders. High above, riding the night thermals, were cruising buzzards, waiting for him to make them a meal. There was no moon, no stars. Oh, high above, riding the night thermals, or crushing butters. Got it. And then a frightened red eye opened in the dark, vulpine, eldritch. The eye terrified him, yet held him. The eye beckoned him. To the west, where the shadows were even now gathering in their twilight dance of death. When they made camp at sundown that evening, they were west of Joliet, Illinois. There was a case of beer, good talk, and laughter. They felt they had put the rain behind them with Indiana. Everyone remarked, especially on Harold, who had never been so cheerful. "You know, Harold," Franny said later that evening, as the party began to break up, "I don't think I've ever seen you feel so good. What is it?" He gave her a jolly wink. "Every dog has its day, Fran." She smiled back at him, a little puzzled, but she supposed it was just Harold being elliptical. It didn't matter. What mattered was that things were finally coming right. That night, Harold began his own journal. Shall we continue for a little bit? Maybe. Are you going to let me continue, or are you going to bark all day? Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
Can you come let Phoebe out of here? I'm not sure what she wants. Can you please open the gate?
Hey.
I want to see what she does. Open the gate and walk away. Now go open the door. Open both doors and then walk away. See if she goes out. She go out? Okay. Well, in that case, we're going to keep reading. Why not? So I'm not sure who else here, but we're going to keep reading. Chapter 48. He came staggering and flapping up a long upgrade, the heat of the sun stewing his stomach and baking his brains. The interstate shimmered with reflected radiant heat. He had been Donald Marilyn Elbert once. Now he was Trash Can Man forever and ever, and he beheld the fabled city, 7-in-1, Ciabola, Ciabola. How long had he been traveling west? How long since the kid? God might know. Trash Can Man did not. It had been days, nights. Oh, he remembered the nights. He stood swaying in his rags, looking down at Cibola, the city that is promised, the city of dreams. He was a wreck. The wrist that he had broken when he leaped the railing of the stairway bolted to the cheery oil tank had not healed right. And that wrist, it was one wrist, had a grotesque lump wrapped in a dirty, unraveling ace bandage. All the bones in the fingers of that hand had pulled up somehow, turning the hand into a Quasimodo claw. His left arm was a slowly healing mass of burned tissue from elbow to shoulder. It no longer smelled bad and suppurated, but the new flesh was hairless and pink, like the skin of the cheap doll. His grinning mad face was sunburned, peeling, scruffy bearded, and covered with scabs from the header he had taken when the front wheel of his bike had parted company from the frame. He tore a faded blue JCPenney work shirt that was marked with expanding rings of sweat stain and a dirty pair of corduroy trousers. His pack, which had been not new not so long ago, had now taken on the style and substance of its owner. One strap had broken. Crash had knotted it as best he could, and the pack now hung askew on his back like a shutter on a haunted house. It was dusty, its creases filled with desert sand. On his feet were keds, now bound together with hanks of twine, and from them his scratched and sand-chafed ankles rose innocent of socks. He stared at the city far ahead and below. He turned his face up to the savage, gunmetal sky and to the sun that blared down, coating him with furnace heat. He screamed. It was a savage, triumphant scream, very much like the one Susan Stern had uttered when she split Roger Rabbit's skull with the butt of his own shotgun. He began to do a shuffling, victorious dance on the hot, shimmering surface of Interstate 15, while the desert Sirocco blue and sand across the highway and the blue peaks of the Parangat and spotted ranges sawed their teeth indifferently at the brilliant sky. I don't know why I'm yawning. Indifferently at the brilliant sky, as they had done for millennia. Off the other side of the highway, a Lincoln Continental and a T-Bird were now almost buried in sand, their occupants mummified behind safety glass. Up ahead, on Trash Can's side, was an overturned pickup, everything covered but the wheels and the rocker panels. He danced, his feet, clad in the lashed and bulging keds, bumped up and down on the highway in a drunken sort of hornpipe. The tattered tail of his shirt. I apologize. The tattered tail of his shirt flapped. His canteen clunked against his pack. The unraveling ends of the ace bandage fluttered in the hot breath of the wind. Pink, smooth burn tissue gleamed rawly. Clock springs of veins bulged at his temples. He had been in God's frying pan for a week now, moving southwest across Utah, the tip of Arizona, and then into Nevada, and he was just as mad as a hatter. As he danced, he sang monotonously, the same words over and over, to a tune that had been popular when he was in the Terre Haute Institution, a song called Down to the Nightclub. Down to the Nightclub, that had been done by a black group called Tower of Power. But the words were his own. He sang, is it Chiabola? Maybe it's Chiabola. Chiabola, Chiabola, bumpity bump, bump. Chiabola, Chiabola, bola, bumpity bump, bump. Each final bump was followed by a little skipping leap until the heat made everything swim and the harsh, bright sky went twilight gray and he collapsed on the road, half fainting. His taxed heart thundering crazily in its arid chest. With the last of his strength, blubbering and grinning, he pulled himself over the overturned pickup truck and lay in its diminishing shade, shivering in the heat and panting. Chiabola, he croaked, bumpity bump bump. He fumbled his canteen off his shoulder with his claw hand and shook it. The canteen was nearly empty. Didn't matter. He would drink every single drop and lay here until the sun went down, and then we'd walk down the highway and into Chiabola, Fable City, 7-1. Tonight he would drink from ever springing fountains faced in gold, but not until the killer sun went down. God was the greatest firebug of them all. A long time ago, a boy named Donald Merwin Elbert torched the Methodist Church in Pottenville, and if there had been anything left of Donald Merwin Elbert in this shell, it was surely been cremated by the oil tanks in Gary, Indiana. Over 9 dozen of them. And they had gone up like a walloping string of firecrackers just in time for the 4th of July, too. Nice. And in the wake of that conflagration, only the trash can man had been left. His left arm, a cracked and boiling stew, a fire inside his body that was never going to go out, at least not until his body was so much blackened charcoal. Tonight, he would drink the water of Chiabola. Yes, and it would taste like wine. He upended the canteen in his... Sorry, I have a little bit of hair in my throat. canteen, and his throat worked as the last of his water, piss swarm, gurgled down into his belly. It was on my shirt, and I must have touched it. When it was gone, he threw the canteen out into the desert. Sweat had broken on his forehead like dew. He lay shivering deliciously with water cramps. Chayabola, he muttered, Chayabola, I'm coming, I'll do whatever you want. My life for you, bumpity bump bump. Drowsiness began to steal over him now that his thirst was a little slaked. He was nearly asleep when a polar thought slipped up through the floor of his mind like an icy stiletto blade. What if Chayabola had been a mirage? No, he muttered. No, no. But simple denial could not drive the thought off. The blade probed and poked, keeping sleep at arm's length. What if he had drank the last of his water in celebration of a mirage? In his own way, he recognized his madness, and that was the sort of thing people did. Right enough. If it had been a mirage, he would die here in the desert, and the buzzards would dine on him. At last, unable to bear the hideous possibility any longer, he staggered to his feet and made his way back to the road, fighting off the waves of faintness and nausea that wanted to take him down. Take him down. At the breast of the hill, he stared out anxiously into the long, flat plain below, studded with yucca and tumbleweed and devil's mantilla. His breath caught in his throat and unraveled into a sigh, like a sieve of fabric on a spoke. It was there. Chayabola, fabled of old, searched for by many, found by the trash can man. Far down in the desert, surrounded by blue mountains, blue itself in the haze of distance, its towers and avenues gleamed in a desert day. There were palm trees. He could see palm trees, and movement, and water. Oh, Chayabola, he groaned and staggered back to the shade of the pickup. It was further than it looked. He knew that. Tonight, after God's torch had left the sky, he would walk as he never had before. He would reach Chayabola, and his first act would be to plunge headlong into the first fountain he came to. Then he would find him, the man who had bade him come here, the man who had drawn him across the plains and the mountains and finally into the desert, all in a month's time, and despite his horribly burned arm. He who is the dark man, the hard case. He waited for Trash Can Man and Chayabola, and his were the armies of the night. His were the white-faced riders of the dead, who would sweep out of the west and into the very face of the rising sun. They would come raving and grinning and stinking of sweat and gunpowder. There would be shrieks, and Trash Can cared very little for shrieks. There would be rape and subjugation, things at which he cared even less. There would be murder, which was immaterial, and there would be great burning. There would be a great burning, and that he cared very much. About that he cared very much. In the dreams, the dark man came to him, spread out his arms from the high place in the showered Trash Can, and showed Trash Can a country in flames, cities going up like bombs, civilized fields drawn in lines of fire, the very rivers of Chicago and Pittsburgh and Detroit and Birmingham ablaze with floating oil. And the dark man had told him a very simple thing in his dreams, a thing which had brought him running. I will set you high in my artillery. You are the man I want. He rolled on his side, his cheeks and eyelids chafed and irritated from the blowing sand. He had been losing hope. Yes, ever since the wheel had fallen off his bike, he had been losing hope. God, the God of father-killing sheriffs, the God of Carly Yates, was stronger than the dark man after all, it seemed. Yet he had kept his faith, and he had kept on. And at last, when it seemed he was going to burn up in the desert before he ever got to Chayabola, where the dark man waited, he had seen it far below, dreaming in the sun. Chayabola, he whispered, and slept. The first dream had come to him and Gary over a month ago, after he had burned his arm. He had gone to sleep the night that night sure he was going to die. No one could be burned as badly as he was and live. A refrain had beaten its way into his head. Live by the torch, die by the torch. Live by it, die by it. His legs had given out in a small city park, and he had fallen down. His left arm sprawled out and away from him like a dead thing. The shirt sleeve smoked off. The pain was giant, incredible. He had never dreamed there could be so much pain in the world. He had been running gleefully from one set of oil tanks to the next, setting up crude timing devices, which constructed of the steel pipe and a flammable paraffin mixture separated from a little pool of acid by the steel tab. He had been pushing these devices into the outflow pipes on top of the tanks. When the acid ate through the steel, the paraffin would ignite, and that would cause the tanks to blow. He had planned to get over to the west side of Gary, near the confusion of the interstates leading various roads toward Chicago or Milwaukee, before any of them blew. He wanted to watch the show as the entire dirty city went up in a firestorm. But he had misjudged the last device and constructed it badly. It had gone off while he worked at opening the cap and the outflow with a pipe wrench. There had been a blinding white flash as burning paraffin belched out of the tube, coating his left arm with fire. There was no painless flame glove of lighter fluid to be waved in the air and then shaken out like a big match. This was agony, like having your arm in a volcano. Shrieking, he had run wildly around the top of the oil tank, careening off the waist-high rails like a human pinball. If the rails had not been there, he would have plunged over the side and fallen, turning over and over like a torch dropped down a well. Only accident saved his life. His feet tangled in each other, and he fell on his left arm, with his left arm pinned under him, smothering the flames. He sat up, still half crazy with the pain. Later he would think that only blind luck, or the dark man's purpose, had saved him from being burned to death. Most of the paraffin jet had missed him, so he was thankful. But his thankfulness only came later. At the time, he could only cry out and rock back and forth, holding his crisp arm out from his body as the skin smoked and crackled and contracted. Vaguely, as the light faded from the sky, it occurred to him that he had already set a dozen of them time devices. They might go any time. Dying and being out of his exquisite misery would be wonderful. Dying in flames would be utter horror. Somehow he had crawled down from the tank and had staggered away, weaving and lunging in and out of dead traffic, holding his barbecued left arm away from his body. By the time he reached a small park near the center of town, it was sunset. He sat on the grass between two shuffleboard courts, trying to think what you did for burns. Put butter on them. That's what Donald Merwin Albert's mother would have said. But that was for the scold, or when the bacon fat jumped extra high and spatted you with hot grease. He couldn't imagine putting butter on the cracked and blackened mess between his elbow and shoulder. Couldn't even imagine touching it. Kill himself? That was it. That was the ticket. He would put himself out of his misery like an old dog. There was a sudden gigantic explosion on the east side of town, as if the fabric of existence had been torn briskly in two. A liquid pillar of fire shot up against the dusk's deepening indigo. He had to squeeze his eyes, the watering, protesting slits against it. Even in his agony, the fire pleased him. The more it delighted and fulfilled him. The fire was the best medicine. Best medicine, even better than the morphine he found the next day. As a trustee in prison, He had worked in the infirmary as well as the library and the motor pool, and he knew about morphine and Elavil and Darvon complex. He did not connect his present agony to the pillar of fire. He only knew that the fire was good, the fire was beautiful, the fire was something he needed and would always need. Wonderful fire. Moments later, a second oil tank exploded. And even here, 3 miles away, he could feel the warm push of expanding air. Another tank went, another. A slight pause, and then 6 of them went up in a rattling string. And now it was too bright over there to look at, but he looked anyway, grinning, his eyes full of yellow flames, his wounded arm forgotten, thoughts of suicide forgotten. It took better than 2 hours for all of them to go up, but by then dark had fallen, and it wasn't dark. The night was yellow and orange and feverish with flames. The entire eastern arc of the horizon danced with fire. It reminded him of a classic funny book he had owned as a child, an adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Now, years later, the boy who had owned that funny book was gone, and the trash can man was here. And Trash owned the wonderful, terrible secret of the Martian's death ray. It was time to leave the park. Already the temperature had risen 10 degrees. He thought he ought to go west, stay ahead of the fire, the way he had in Pottonville, racing the expanding arc of destruction. But he was in no condition to race. So he fell asleep on the grass, and the firelight played over the face of the tired, ill-used child. In his dream, the dark man came in a hooded robe, his face invisible. The loungers in the candy store and the beer parlor back in Pottonville. I still can't do that. Cat called at him. It seemed that this man had been among them, silent and thoughtful. When he had worked at the Scrub-a-Dubba, soaped the headlights, knocked the wipers, soaped the rocker panels. Hey, mister, you want hot wax on that? Wearing the sponge glove on his right hand until the hand beneath looked like a pale dead fish, the nails as white as fresh ivory. It seemed he had seen this man's face, fiery and grinning with lunatic joy from beneath the rippling film of water rolling down the windshield. When the sheriff had sent him away to the nuthatch Terre Haute, he had been the grinning psych aide standing above his head in the room where they gave you the shocks, his hands on the controls. I'm going to fry your brains out, boy. Help you on your way as you change from Donald Merwin Elbert into the trash can man. Would you like hot wax on that? Ready to send about 1,000 volts. Zizzling into his brain. He knew this dark man all right. His was the face you could never quite see. His were the hands which dealt all spades from the dead deck. His were the eyes beyond the flames. His the grin from beyond the grave of the world. I'll do whatever you want, he said gratefully in the dream. My life for you. The dark man had lifted his arms inside his robe, turning the robe into the shape of a black kite. They stood on a high place, and below them America lay in flames. I will set you high in my artillery. You are the man I want. Then he saw an army of 10,000 raggle-taggle, cast-off men and women driving east, driving across the desert and into the mountains. A rough beast of an army whose time had come round at last. They loaded down trucks and jeeps and wagoneers and campers and tanks. Each man and woman wore a dark stone about his or her neck, and deep in some of those stones was the red shape that might have been an eye or might have been a key. And riding in their van atop a giant tanker with pillow tires, he saw himself. Pillow tires? And he knew that the truck was filled with jellied napalm. And behind him in column were the trucks loaded with pressure bombs and teller mines and plastic explosive, flamethrowers and flame and heat-seeking missiles, grenades and machine guns and rocket launchers. The dance of death was about to begin, and already the strings of fiddles and guitars were smoking, and the stench of brimstone and cordite filled the air. The dark man lifted his arms again, and when he dropped them, everything was cold and silent, the fire gone, even the ashes cold. For just a moment, he was only Donald Merwin Elbert again, small and afraid and confused. For just that moment, he suspected he was just another pawn in the dark man's huge chess game, that he had been deceived. Then he saw the dark man's face was no longer entirely hidden. Two dark red coals burned in the sunken pits where his eyes should have been, and illuminated a nose as narrow as a blade. "I'll do whatever you want," Trash said gratefully in the dream. "My life for you, my soul for you. I will set you to burn," the dark man said gravely. "You must come to my city, and there all will be made clear." "Where? Where?" he said in an agony of hope and expectation. "West," the dark man said, fading. "West, beyond the mountains." He woke up then, and it was still night and still bright. The flames were closer. The heat was stifling. Houses were exploding. The stars were gone, shrouded in a thick pall of oil smoke. A fine rain of soot had begun. The shuffleboard courts were dusted with black snow. Now that he had a purpose, he found he could walk. He limped west, and from time to time he saw a few others leaving Gary, looking back over their shoulders at the conflagration. "Fools," Trash thought, almost affectionately. "You'll burn, good time, you'll burn." They took no notice of him. To them, the trash can man was only another survivor. They disappeared into the smoke, and some time after dawn, trash can man limped across the Illinois state line.
I'm just going upstairs, okay, Mom?
All right, I'll see you in a bit.
See you in bed? For what?
So I can get my charger when I go to bed.
Oh, what?
Chicago was north of him.
Juliet.
Juliet.
At 100%.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Well,
it's good.
go put that in my room then. No, go ahead and put it
No,
up in
you
my...
can take it upstairs.
If you're going upstairs, you can put it in my room.
Can you do that, please?
Please. You're already going up there. I got to carry the heater.
No,
I have to carry the heater.
Carry the heater.
No, I'm going to need it if I get cold. That's why I asked you to take that instead. So that the only thing I have to carry is the heater when I go up. Okay?
As a reminder, you have to carry... I will carry that in the morning.
Okay. You want to bring the dogs in before you go up?
Okay.
Thank you. Limped across the Illinois state line. Chicago was north of him, Joliet to the southeast. The fire lost in its own horizon, blotting smoke behind. That had been the dawn of July 2nd. He had forgotten his dreams of burning Chicago to the ground, his dreams of more oil tanks and freight cars full of LP gas tucked away on railroad sidings and tinder dry tenements. He didn't care a fig for the Windy City. That afternoon he broke into the Chicago Heights doctor's office and stole a case of morphine syrups. "Hi. Oh, you're cold and you're wet." The morphine drove back the pain a little, but it was more important side effect. It made him care less about the pain he did feel. He took a huge jar of Vaseline from the drugstore that night and packed the burned part of his arm in an inch of the jelly. He was very thirsty. It seemed he wanted to drink all the time. Fantasies of the dark man buzzed in and out of his mind like blowflies. When he collapsed at dusk, he had already begun to think that the city the dark man was directing him to must be Cibola, 7-1, the city that is promised. That night, the dark man came to him again in his dreams, and with a sardonic giggle, confirmed that this was so. Yeah. Yeah. What? I'm still reading. I asked Nick to put my charger up there so I didn't have to carry my charger, my phone, and the furnace when I came to bed later. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm still reading. It's okay. Yeah. No, he brought Phoebe in, and then I asked him to take my charger up. So, yeah, no, I'm still reading. All right. I talk to you soon. All right. Love you. All right. Bye. I was going to bed right now. Today's garbage day, making sure we got the garbage out. Yeah, it's been out. Trash can man awoke from these confused dream memories of what had been to shivering desert cold. In the desert, it was always cold or fire. There was no in between. Moaning a little, he stood up, holding himself as close to himself as he could. What? Oh, holding himself. Overhead, a trillion stars gleamed, seeming almost close enough to touch, bathing the desert in their cold, white witch light. He walked back to the road, wincing at his chafed and tender skin and his many aches and pains. They were little to him now. He paused for a moment, looking down at the city, dreaming in the night. There were little sparks of light there, here and there, like electricity campfires. Then he began to walk. When dawn began to color the sky hours later, Cibola seemed almost as distant as it had when he first came over the rise and saw it. And he had foolishly drunk all of his water, forgetting how magnified things looked out here. He didn't dare walk for long after sunrise because of the dehydration. He would have to lie up again before the sun rose in all its power. An hour past dawn, he came to a Mercedes-Benz off the road. Its right side drifted in sand up to the door panels. He opened one of the left side doors and pulled the two wrinkled, monkey-like occupants out. An old woman wearing a lot of Bengal jewelry, an old man with theatrical-looking white hair, muttering. Trash can took the keys from the ignition, went around and opened the trunk. Their suitcases were not locked. He hung a variety of clothes over the windows of the Mercedes, weighing them down with rocks. Now he had a cool, dim cave. He crawled in and went to sleep. Miles to the west, the city of Las Vegas gleamed in the light of the summer sun. He couldn't drive a car. They had never taught him that in prison. But he could ride a bike. On July 4th, the day that Larry Underwood discovered Rita Blakemore had overdosed and died in her sleep, Trash Can Man took a 10-speed and began to ride. At first, his progress was slow because his left arm wasn't much good to him. He fell off twice the first day, once squarely, hiccups, on his bum, causing terrible agony. By then, the burn was suppurating freely through the Vaseline, and the smell was terrific. He wondered from time to time about gangrene, but would not allow himself to wonder for long. He began to mix the Vaseline with an antiseptic ointment, not knowing if it would help. But, feeling it certainly couldn't hurt any, it made a milky, vicious gloop that looked like semen. Ugh. Little by little, he adjusted to riding the bike, mostly one-handed, and found that he could make good speed. The land had flattened out, and most of the time he could keep the bike speeding glidily along. He drove himself steadily in spite of the burn and the light-headedness that came from being constantly stoned on morphine. He drank gallons of water and ate prodigiously. He pondered the dark man's words. I will set you high in my artillery. You are the man I want. How lovely those words were. Had anyone really wanted him before? The words played over and over in his mind as he pedaled over the hot mid-western sun, and he began to hum the medley of the little tune called Down to the Nightclub under his breath. The words Chiabola, bumpity bump bump, came in their own good time. He was not then as insane as he was to become, but he was advancing. On July 8th, the day Nick Andros and Tom Collin saw buffalo grazing in Comanche County Kansas, Trash Can Man crossed the Mississippi at the Quad Cities of Davenport, Rock Island, Bettendorf, and Moline. He was in Iowa. On the 14th, the day Larry Underwood woke up near the Big White House in eastern New Hampshire, Trash Can crossed the Missouri north of Council Bluffs and entered Nebraska. He had regained some use of his left hand. His leg muscles had toned up, and he pressed on, feeling a huge need to hurry. It was on the west side of the Missouri that Trash first suspected that God himself might intervene between Trash Can Man and his destiny. There was something wrong about Nebraska, something dreadfully wrong, something that made him afraid. It looked about the same as Iowa, but it wasn't. The dark man had come to him every previous night in dreams, but when Trash crossed into Nebraska, the dark man came no more. Instead, he began to dream about an old woman. In those dreams, he would find himself belly down in a cornfield, almost paralyzed with hate and fear. It was bright morning. He could hear flocks of crows cawing. In front of him was a screen of brood, sword-like corn leaves. Not wanting to, but powerless to stop himself, he would spread the leaves with a shaking hand and peer between them. He saw an old house in the middle of a clearing. The house was up on blocks, or jacks, or something. There was an apple tree with a tire swing hanging from one of the branches, and sitting on the porch was an old black woman playing a guitar and singing some old-time spiritual song. The song varied from dream to dream, and Trash Can knew most of them because he had once known a woman, the mother of a boy named Donald Merwin Elbert, who had sung many of the same songs as she did her housework. This dream was a nightmare, but not just because something exceedingly horrible happened at the end of it. At first, you would have said there wasn't a frightening element to the whole dream. Corn, blue sky, old woman, tire swing. What could be frightening about those things? Old women didn't throw rocks and jeer, especially not old women that sang old home Jesus jumping songs like In the Great Getting Up Morning and By and By, Sweet Lord, By and By. It was the Carly Yates's. Really? I'm trying to read and you got her barking? I don't know why you have to tease her. It was the Carly Yateses of the world who threw rocks. But long before the dream ended, he was... Phoebe, stop. He was paralyzed with fear, as if it wasn't an old woman at all he was peeking at, but at some secret, some barely concealed light that seemed ready to break out all around her, to play over her with a fiery brilliance that would make flaming oil tanks of Gary seem like many candles in the wind, a light so bright it could chalk his eyes to cinders. And during this part of the dream, all he thought was, oh, please get me away from her. I don't want no part of this old biddy. Oh, please get me out of Nebraska. Then whatever song she had been playing would come to a discordant, jangling stop. She would look right at the place where he was peeping through a tiny loophole in the broad lattice of leaves. Her face was old and seamed with wrinkles. Her hair was thin enough to show her brown skull, but her eyes were bright as diamonds, full of the light he feared. In an old, cracked, but strong voice, she would cry out, "Weasels in the corn!" And he would feel that change in himself and would look down to see he had become a weasel, a furry, brownish black, stinking thing. His nose grown long and sharp, his eyes melted down to beady black points. His fingers turned into claws. He was a weasel, a cowardly, nocturnal thing preying on the weak and the small. He would begin to scream then, and eventually he would scream himself awake, screaming, sweat, and buggy-eyed. His hands would fly over his head, reassuring himself that all his human parts were still there. At the end of this panicky check, he would grip his head, making sure it was still a human head and not something long and sleek, streamlined, furry, and bullet-shaped. He crossed 400 miles of Nebraska in 3 days, running mostly on high-octane terror. He crossed into Colorado near Julesburg, and the dream began to fade and grow sepia-toned. For Mother Abigail's part, she woke on the night of July 15th, shortly after Trash Can Man had passed north of Hemingford home, with a terrible chill and a feeling that was both fear and pity. Pity for whom or for what, she did not know. She thought she might have been dreaming of her grandson Anders, who had been killed senselessly in a hunting accident. He was but 6. On July 18th, then southwest of Sterling, Colorado, and still some miles from Brush, he had met the kid. Trash woke up just as twilight was falling, in spite of the clothes he had hung over the windows. The Mercedes had gotten hot. His throat was a dry well which had been faced with sandpaper. His temples thumped and jumped. He ran his tongue out, and when he stroked it with his finger, it felt like a dead tree branch. Sitting up, he put his hand on the Mercedes steering wheel and then drew back with a scalded hiss of pain. He had to wrap his shirt tail around the door handle to let himself out. He thought he would just step out, but he had overestimated the strength and underestimated how far the dehydration had advanced. On this August evening. His legs collapsed and he fell onto the road, which was also hot. Moaning, he scrabbled his way into the shadow of the Mercedes, like a crippled crawdad. He sat there, arms and head dangling between his cocked knees, panting. He stared morbidly at the 2 bodies he had pulled out of the car, she with her bangles on her shriveled arms, and he with his shock of theatrical white hair above his mummified monkey face. He must get to Chiabola before the sun came up. You gonna make those? I already said that. He must get to Chiabola before the sun came up tomorrow morning. If he didn't, he would die. And in spite of his goal, surely the dark man would not be as cruel as that. Surely not. My life for you, Trash Can Man whispered. And when the sun had dropped below the line of the mountains, he gained his feet and began to walk toward the towers, minarets, and avenues of Chiabola, where the sparks of the lights were coming on again. As the heat of the day segued, S-E-G-U-E-D. I don't know. Segued, because it looks like glued without the L. Into the cool of the desert night, he found himself more able to walk. His sprung and rope-tied sneakers flapped and thudded against the surface of I-15. He was plodding along, his head hanging like a bloom of a dying sunflower, and did not see the green reflectorized sign that read Las Vegas 30 when he passed it. He was thinking about the kid. By rights, the kid should have been with him now. They should have driven into Chiabola together, with the straight pipes of the kid's deuce coupe blading back echoes from the desert. But the kid had proved unworthy, and Trash had been sent on alone into the wilderness. His feet rose and fell on the pavement. Chiabola, he croaked, bumpity bump bump. Oh, bumpity bumpity bump. Not bumpity bump bump. After midnight, he collapsed on the side of the road and fell into an uneasy doze. The city was closer now. He would make it. He was quite sure he would make it. He heard the kid a long time before he saw him. It was a heavy, crackling roar of unmuffled straight pipes thundering toward him from the east, branding the day. The sound was coming up Highway 34 from the direction of Yuma, Colorado. His first impulse was to hide, the way he'd hidden from a few other survivors he'd seen since Gary. But this time something made him stay where he was, astride his bike on the shoulder of the road, looking back apprehensively over his shoulder. The thunder grew louder and louder, and then the sun was reflecting off chrome and fire? Something bright and orange. The driver saw him. Downshifted into a machine gun burst of backfires. Goodyear rubber peeled off on the highway in hot swatches. And then the car was beside him. Are you enjoying putting yourself back there? Just stretching. Stretching. You got my nose wet. You got my lip wet with your nose. And then the car was beside him, not idling, but panting like a deadly animal which may or may not be tamed. And the driver was getting out. But at first, Trash Can only had eyes for the car. He knew about cars. He liked cars. Even though he had never gotten so much as a learner's permit. This one was a beauty. A car someone had worked on for years. Put thousands of dollars into. The kind of thing you usually only saw at funny car shows. A labor of love. It was a 1932 Ford Deuce Coupe. But the owner had not stinted nor stopped with the usual Deuce Coupe customizing innovations. He had gone on and on, turning it into a parody of all American cars, a glittering science fiction vehicle with hand-painted flames billowing out of the manifold pipes. The paint job was flake gold. The chrome head pipes, which stretched almost the whole length of the car, reflected the sun fiercely. The windshield was a convex bubble. Back tires were gigantic Goodyear wide ovals. The wheel wells cut to an exaggerated height and depth to accommodate them. Growing out of the hood, like a weird heating duct, was a supercharger. Growing out of the roof, solid black but shot with red flecks of embers, was a steel shark fin. Written on both sides were two words, raked backward to indicate speed. The kid, they said. Okay, now I have to know what this car is supposed to look like. Okay, that's what I thought. It's almost like a ZZ Top kind of car. Okay, now we know. The heck are you watching? Man, and without me, you're just mean. Hey, I'm reading. I will come in and I can't. I'm into this. I'll stop in a little bit though. And then I'll just imagine the scenes, especially this one with everybody shooting upside down and stuff. It's the first one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Deadpool. I love Deadpool. Okay, there we go. Now. A weird heating duct was a supercharger. Oh, wait, we're back to indicate speed. The kid, they said. Okay. Hey, y'all long, tall, and ugly, driver drawled, and Trash shifted his attention from the painted flames to the driver of his rolling bomb. He stood about 5 feet 3 inches, tall as me. His hair was piled and swirled and pomaded and brilliantined. The hair alone gave him another 3 inches of height. The spirals all met high above his collar. Sounds like an Elvis dude, you know? And what was not just a duck's ass, but the avatar of all duck's asses hairdos. duck's-ass hairdos ever affected by the punks and hoods of the world. He was wearing black boots with pointed toes. The sides were elasticized. The heels, which gave the kid another 3 inches. Okay, so that's like 5'9" now. Bringing him up to a respectable 5'9" total, were stacked Cubans. His pegged and faded jeans were tight enough to read the dates of the coins in his pockets. I don't know how you can have them that tight as a guy. They limbed each nifty little buttock into a kind of blue sculpture and made his crotch look like he'd maybe stuffed a Pomeos bag full of Spalding golf balls in there. He wore a Western-style silk shirt of an off-burgundy color. It was decorated with yellow trim and imitation sapphire buttons. So we're looking at maroon, yellow, okay. The cufflinks looked like polished bone. Trash later found out that was just what they were, polished bone. Oh. The kid had 2 sets, one made from a pair of human molars, the other from the incisors of a Doberman pinscher. Okay. Over this wonder of a shirt, in spite of the heat of the day, he wore a black leather motorcycle jacket with an eagle on the back. It was crisscrossed with zippers, the teeth glimmering like diamonds. From the shoulder flaps and waist belt, 3 rabbit's feet dangled. One was white, one brown, one bright St. Patty's Day green. This jacket even more wonderful than the shirt, creaked smugly with rich oil. Above the eagle, this time written in white silk thread, were the words, "The Kid." The face now looking up at the trash can man from between the high pile of gleaming hair and upturned collar of the gleaming motorcycle jacket was tiny and pallid, a doll's face, with heavy but flawless sculpted pouting lips, dead gray eyes, a wide forehead without a mark or a seam, and strong full cheeks. He looked like baby Elvis, what I tell you. 2 gun belts were crisscrossed on his flat belly, and a giant 45 leaned out of each of the sagging holsters on his hips. "Hey, boy, what you say?" the kid drawled. And the only thing Trash could think of to say was, "I like your car." It was the right thing, maybe the only thing. 5 minutes later, Trash was in the passenger seat, and the Deuce Coupe was accelerating up to the kid's cruising speed, which was about 95. The bike Trash had been riding all the way from eastern Illinois was fading to a speck on the horizon. Timidly, Trash Can Man suggested that at such speed, the kid would not be able to see a wreck or a stall in the road if they came to one. They were already came to several, as a matter of fact. The kid simply slalomed around them, the wide ovals shrieking unheeded protest. "Hey, boy," the kid said. "I got the reflexes, I got the time, and I got the 3/5 of a second. You believe that?" "Yes, sir," Trash said faintly. He felt like a man who had just used a stick to stir up a nest of snakes. "I like you, boy," the kid said. In his... "Okay, leave me one," the kid said in his odd, droning voice. His doll's eyes stared out over the fluorescent orange steering wheel at the shimmering road. Large styrofoam dice with death's heads for pipes dangled. Oh my God, I remember those dice. We used to hang all kinds of things from mirrors. With death's heads for pips dangled and bounced from the rearview mirror. The pips are the little circles. "Get your beer out in the back seat." There were Coors. They were warm, and Trash Man hated beer, and he drank one fast and said how good it was. "Hey, boy," the kid said, "Coors beer's the only beer I'd piss cores if I could. You believe that, happy crappy? Trash man said he did indeed believe that, happy crappy. They call me the kid. Out of Shreveport, Louisiana. You know that? This here beast won every major car show award in the South. You believe that, happy crappy? Trash can said he did. Trash can man said he did, and got another warm beer. It seemed like the best move under the circumstances. What they call you, boy? Trash can man. The what? For a horrible moment, the dead doll's eyes rested on Trash can man's face. You're joking me, boy. Ain't nobody jokes the kid. And you better believe that, happy crappy. I do believe it, Trash can said earnestly. But that's what they call me. Because I used to light fires in people's trash cans and mailboxes and stuff. I set old lady Semple's pension tech on fire. I got sent to the reformatory for it. I also burned down the Methodist church in Powhatan, Indiana. Did ya? The kid asked delightedly. Boy, you sound as crazy as a rat in a shit house. That's okay. I like crazy people. I'm crazy myself. Tripped right out of my fucking gourd. Trash can man, huh? I like that. We make a pair. The fucking kid and the fucking trash can man. Shake, Trash. The kid offers his hand, and Trash shook it as quick as he could so that the kid could put his hands back on the wheel. They whizzed around a bend, and there was a beckoned semi nearly blocking the whole highway, and Trash put his hands over his face, prepared to make an immediate transition to the astral plane. The kid never turned a hair. The Deuce Coupe skittered along the left side of the highway like a water bug, and they skinned by the cab of the truck with a coat of paint to spare. Close, Trash can said, when he felt he could speak without a quiver in his voice. Hey, boy, the kid said flatly. Then one of the doll's eyes closed in a solemn wink. Don't tell me, I tell you. How's that beer? Pretty fucking gnarly, ain't it? It's the spot after riding the kiddie bike, don't it? Sure does, Trash can man said, and took another big swallow of warm course. He was insane, but not yet insane enough to disagree with the kid while he was driving. Nowhere near. Well, no sense beating around the motherfucking bush, the kid said, reaching back over the seat to get his own can of suds. I guess we're going to the same place. I guess so, Trash said cautiously. Gonna join up, the kid said. Going west. Gonna get in on the motherfucking ground floor. You believe that, happy crappy? I guess so. You been dreaming about that boogeyman in the black flight suit, ain't ya? You mean the priest? I always mean what I say, and say what I mean, the kid said flatly. Don't tell me, you fucking bug, I'll tell you. It's a black flight suit, and the guy's got goggles, like a John Wayne movie about Big Two. Goggles so big, you can't see his motherfucking face. Spooky old cock knocker, ain't he? Yeah, Trashman said, and sipped his warm beer. His head was beginning to buzz. The kid hunched over the orange steering wheel and began to imitate the fighter pilot, one who had done his stuff in Big Two, presumably in a dogfight. The Deuce Coupe roller coastered alarmingly from one side of the road to the other as he imitated loops and dives and barrel rolls. Yeah, bada. Take that, you fucking kraut, Captain. Bandits at 12 o'clock. Turn the air cooler cannon on 'em, you fucking dipstick. Taka. We got 'em, sir, all clear. Ooh, yeah. Stand down, fellers. Ooh, hauga. That was the word. His face gained no expression as he went through this fantasy. Not a single well-oiled hair fell from Grace. I got an itchy nose. As he jerked the car back into its lane and pounded on up the road, Trash Can Man's heart thudded heavily in his chest. A light sheen of sweat had oiled his body. He drank his beer. He had to make wee-wee. But he don't scare me, the kid said, as if the former topic of conversation had never lapsed. Fuck no, he's a hard baby. And the kid has handled hard babies before. I shut him up, and then I shut him down, just like the boss says. You believe that, Happy Crappy? Sure, Trash said. You dig the boss? Sure, Trash said. He hadn't the slightest idea who the boss was or had been. Fucking better dig the boss. Listen, you know what I'm gonna do? Go west? Trash can man hazarded. It seemed safe. The kid looked impatient. After I get there, I mean, after. You know what I'm gonna do after? No, what? I'm gonna lay low for a while, check out the situation. Can you dig the Happy Crappy? Sure, Trash said. Fucking A. Don't tell me, I fucking tell you. Just check it out. Check out the big man then. The kid fell silent, brooding over the top of his orange steering wheel. Then what? Trash Can said hesitantly. Gonna shut him down. Send him around Dead Man's Curve. Put him out to pasture on the motherfucking Cadillac Ranch. You believe it? Yeah, sure. I'm gonna take over, the kid said confidently. Gonna strip his gears. Leave him at the Cadillac Ranch. Stick with me, Trash Can. Or whatever the fuck you call yourself. We ain't gonna eat no pork and beans. We're gonna eat more chicken than any man ever seen. The Deuce Coupe roared down the highway, with painted flames shooting up from the manifold. Trash Can Man sat in the passenger seat, a warm beer in his lap, and troubled in his mind. So, we're going to stop there, because I have been reading over 2 hours now, about 2 hours now, and we're doing pretty good. So, because this chapter is like really, really long. So, yeah, it's like really long. Like, I probably got another hour and a half to read to end it. So, we're going to stop there, and we will continue 48 tomorrow. And I'm going to write that we got through part of 48 today. That's pretty cool. I haven't been able to do 2 chapters in a while. So, there. So, that we got in. So, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go get me some tea and warm up because I'm a little chilly. But, thank you guys for sticking with me so long. I really do appreciate it. I hope y'all have a good night. I think so that I don't miss anybody in the chat again. I think what I'm going to do is continue what I was doing and write down what we're reading. Although, it is in the title. So, hopefully the title makes some sense. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure if the title's in the videos. Yeah, it is. It is. Okay. Just want to make sure. So anyway, I will talk to you guys soon. I will be back tomorrow morning. Probably around 11-ish. As long as my son gets up and out the door by 10:30. So, I will see you guys tomorrow. I love y'all. Don't forget to follow if you want.
I got my appointment at 11:30 tomorrow. As long as it doesn't rain, I can walk.
I guess we better check the temperature. I might have to take a short break while I'm reading. So, but anyway, I will talk to you guys tomorrow. All right? Bye.